I am your matchmaker for today. My name is Alana Schaefer, as I said. I have 10 years in project and program management. I have worked in government. I actually worked at Treasury for the Office of the CIO. I started my career at a small web development firm. I currently work at a medium-sized web development firm. I've worked at marketing companies. I worked at a government contractor that just did sole government contracting and hosting. So I've kind of seen this relationship from almost every aspect. I do have my FAT Core 1 certification as well, so I've sort of acted not as a contracting officer, but worked a lot with the contracting officers, so even seen it from that side. I've written RFPs, I've responded to RFPs, I've run the gamut, and so I've seen a lot. My current company actually does a lot of work on what we call our rescue missions, where client relationships, vendor relationships have gone bad. The client now needs someone to come in and rescue them after 3 years of work. Recently, a national association came to us and said, we've been working with our vendor for 4 years just to get an accreditation system up. We need help. And so we do those things often. We've seen kind of a lot of what can go wrong. And so I want to try to help, if I can, make it not go wrong for you. And that sort of starts at the beginning. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the bad dates that we've all been on, and please feel free to chime in. I'll even leave room at the end. If you've had other experiences that you want to share, please share. So the bad dates. You write an RFP, you put out a request, even informal, and nobody seems to be able to meet your needs. It's so frustrating. You have to go through the process a couple times because nothing is meeting your needs. Or some of them seem to meet your needs, but if you're working with a contracting officer, maybe that company didn't meet every single criteria in exactly the right order and you've had to throw them away. That's happened to me. Really frustrating. Or sometimes you get a bunch of responses that seem to meet your needs and they seem perfect, and then they can't deliver, or it's just not a good working relationship and these people are not the right fit for you. Also really frustrating because now you're even further into the relationship, right? Maybe there's a really great one, and then you start working with the vendor, and the very first week they start getting into the requirements and scope creep. This is scope creep. We're gonna have to add scope now. This is gonna cost you more money. This is gonna take longer. Wait, we just started. You just wrote this proposal for me. You had my requirements. Why are you telling me scope creep already, right? Really frustrating. So that's just some of the sort of bad experiences that I think happen fairly often. And so I wanted you to know that I sympathize, I'm with you. Are there other experiences people want to bring up? You don't have to. Even though I said I was calling on the people in the back row for sitting in the back row, I won't really. So the first thing I would say is think about who's writing your, as I'm calling it, your profile. Who's writing your RFP? Who's being the person to solicit the responses or the proposals? Sometimes it's a vendor. I've seen both government agencies, sometimes they go to a trusted vendor partner who's not going to bid on the final thing and have them help them with the RFP. Sometimes, if you're not in government, if you're an association, you might go to a vendor and say, can you help me? I don't have the expertise to even write the RFP. That can cause some problems. A lot of times a vendor will write an RFP that's going to meet their expertise and their knowledge area and what they could do for you. Not necessarily that's truly going to encompass what you need and what your needs are. Sometimes the contract officer or not an expert on what's happening will write the RFP. I worked with a contracting officer once who insisted on writing every RFP, and she would call us and ask us some questions, and then she would write an RFP, and when we'd get it, we'd be like, what? You missed tons of our major requirements. I mean, there's no way we can get a good vendor in here with this. You don't understand it. Let us contribute more. And she just really felt like her process was to write it. And that can be a problem because she didn't include nearly enough information to allow a vendor to truly respond to our needs. Or a non-technical team needing technical work. I mean, this happens a lot. Recently, I had a client who, they're a communications team, and they need an online quiz. And so their communications team got together and put together a quickie little RFP for us to respond to. They're not a government agency, so it didn't need to be anything big and formal. And they didn't tell us anything about their hosting needs or what stack or what language it needed, where it was going to be, where it was going to be hosted, where they envisioned it, sort of the front end looking and living and all of that. And so we got into the project and we said, we don't even know what language to write this in. I mean, thankfully we've got PHP developers and Java developers and, .NET developers, so we could accommodate whatever it turned out they needed, but they hadn't thought to put that in there. And so it was hard for us to know how to price it, what team we were going to use, that kind of a thing. Sometimes the technical team needing the work. That seems like the perfect scenario, right? I worked for a boss who was an amazing solutions architect, really smart guy, but his RFPs were all exactly how you're supposed to build it. Not so much what we needed it to do, exactly how you're supposed to build it. This is how I want this workflow to work and all of that stuff. And we'll talk about why that can sometimes be a problem in just a minute. And sometimes they often are so close to it, they don't include context. And so, they don't even talk about the stakeholders and anything. And a good strategic vendor, would want and need to know that stuff to be able to help you properly. So how do you make it a little bit better? What can you do to sort of start this off on the right foot? Some ideas are, I generally say don't let a vendor lead the effort. I am a vendor right now. Don't let me do it. Actually, at DrupalCon, we had a gentleman come over and say, do you want to help me write the RFP? And we said, no, we don't. If you have some technical questions, we'll give you some answers, but we don't want to help you write it. We want to know what you need. From the functional level, what do you need? I can't tell you that. I can't write that for you. You should lead it. If you need us for some help and some, what do I need to include? We're happy to help you. But no, I don't want to write it. Believe it or not, I don't. Focusing on the what you need, not the how to build it, but the what you truly need. How do you need this system to function in the end? Do you need single sign-on? Well, maybe don't tell me exactly the workflow for the single sign-on and the integration, but tell me that you need single sign-on. Tell me you need two-factor authentication and that you want users to be able to, pick whether they want, text as their two-factor or an email or, tell those things. Focusing on the what can really help. And again, I'll touch on a little bit more of why later, but I really try to think from that highest level to start with, and that has often led to better sort of RFPs, which lead to better responses and gives more flexibility and kind of starts the relationship off on the right foot. Involving all the stakeholders up front. So in my example of my recent client who the communications team put together the RFP, if they had just brought in the technical team to put in a couple things, that would have helped us a lot when we were responding. So the non-technical folks, the technical folks, anyone that has a say in it, if they can, have them participate in writing the RFP or putting out the solicitation. Figure out what their needs in this are before you get into it, before a vendor's trying to respond. It can be really helpful, and it can be short and informal. They don't have to take a 3-day review of it, however it works, but try to really think about everyone that's going to need to be involved in the project and include them right up front. So this is actually an example of something that I loved. So including only the really critical technical requirements. So the hosting environment details. Does it have to be a LAMP stack? You have to host it here, and so that's valid. You need that. Things that are not the suggested. So this was a really great one. I loved this RFP because they said that this is the system we'd like to use, this is the system we're using now, this is what we're comfortable with, this is really where we want to go. But if you have some major concerns, we can be flexible. So this isn't 100%, solidified requirement. It's this is what we'd like, this is where we'd like to go, but we're willing to hear your suggestions or your concerns. And so it gave the vendor some freedom to provide some strategic recommendations and solutions and concerns that maybe the client hadn't thought of. And so I really liked this example. again, I sort of already talked about this, but really drafting the requirements from the user perspective. And I don't mean just the end user. If it's a website, yes, the end user is important. The content managers are important too. Don't forget about their needs. Anyone who's going to use the system, the administrators. If it's a CRM, you know, both your customers are going to use it. If it's an online store, the people that are purchasing, but also the people that have to add the books or whatever you're selling. You know, any of those things, really think about it from the user perspective of what are your end business requirements. I think people can sometimes, especially the technical folks, get really caught up in what are the technical requirements and almost forget about the user requirements. And drafting it from the user requirements, again, allows a vendor to be strategic, to be your trusted partner, to make some recommendations in their experience. You're probably hiring them for a reason. Sure, it may be personnel support. It may just be that you just need an extra developer, and in that case, maybe this isn't as important. But if you're hiring them for their expertise and their knowledge, let them show that. So again, I also kind of touched on this, but really thinking about, are your technical requirements required or desired? 99% uptime, lamp stack, those are probably pretty good requirements. Those kind of have to happen, you know? Whether it's the East-West region on Amazon versus the GovCloud region, hosting with 2 load balancers, there may be other ways to achieve your 99% uptime, and the vendor may be able to suggest a really good recommended way to do that if you're not dictating it's got to be this. You may have security reasons that it has to be something. In that case, that is a requirement, not a desire. But really think through, is this truly a requirement? Can we be flexible on this? So talking a little bit about what all of that means, kind of lets you see everyone's true colors. Lets them see yours, lets you see theirs. You know, you want to know who you're getting into a relationship with. Providing the background, the history. If you have a budget, letting the vendor know the budget up front can be helpful. I know you can't always do that, but it can be helpful because that allows a vendor to try to think of creative ways to maybe solve some of your needs, or maybe tell you up front, you know, if you just took this little piece of scope out, you're going to hit that budget. Or if you just did this instead of that, you might be able to hit that budget better. And so people are really hesitant to tell budgets. I know that, and it's sort of a negotiating tactic, and you know, whoever puts the budget out first feels like they're the lesser position. But that's not always true. It can really, a good vendor, a good strategic vendor, and someone who's going to be a good partner to you wants to help you for whatever you can budget. Or maybe your budget is just so low that they know they can't do this. They're not wasting your time in reviewing it. They're not wasting their time in preparing it. Your budget just puts them as they're not a match for you, you know? And so the background and the history can be really important. Knowing that you've tried this 3 times with vendors in the past and it didn't work for X, Y, and Z reason. You know what? If they say, "Oh, we've got those same characteristics," we're not gonna waste these people's time. We're the same as what they're saying failed. Oh no, we've got this expertise that they clearly didn't have with these other companies. This might be perfect for us. It just puts you all kind of on a more even footing. There's more transparency. So the functional, not the technical. Again, you want to find a strategic partner, let them have the opportunity to be strategic, to give you guidance, to be trusted up front. You know, telling them the high level and not dictating exactly how they need to build everything can allow them some flexibility and some strategy there. Sort of repeated that. Being flexible allows for proper and true scoping and budgeting too. You know, if you dictate exactly how it needs to be built, I'm going to budget it building exactly that way. If you tell me what you need it to accomplish, I may be able to come up with a really good way to meet it within your budget. It wouldn't necessarily be exactly the way you'd build it, but I might be able to do it if you're willing to be flexible. And so it can help you get to the place you want to be a little bit better. So how do you now pick your date or your vendor? So I actually, that really technical boss that I once worked for, hated when we would get questions on RFPs. He's like, we included all of the stuff in there. And sometimes it was just a vendor who wasn't paying attention to the RFP and it was clear, and that was frustrating. But sometimes they were asking us really good, really well thought out questions. And I was like, this person really cares. They are trying to actually understand this. These are good questions. This is probably a decent vendor who actually wants to participate and who isn't just gonna do what we say just because we said it. They're gonna help us figure out a good way to do this. And so remember that questions aren't always a bad thing. It can also help you understand when a vendor's not paying attention to the details because it's in your RFP in 3 different places and they haven't caught it. That's a good thing to know about the vendor. A lot of times organizations will say they're technology agnostic. A lot of times what that means is they contract work out to their different subcontractors. That may be fine with you. There is nothing wrong with that. But it's a getting to a good point of understanding that company and what that relationship is going to be. Sometimes having subcontractors, as long as they're experts, that's great. Who cares? I don't need direct contact necessarily with them. If I am the kind of person who I want to be talking every day exactly to the people that are going to be working on this, that might not be the right relationship for me. And so asking those questions and really understanding when a vendor says something, what they mean by that, and really thinking through some of those things can help you avoid those awkward situations later. Remembering that budget isn't everything. Sometimes you do have to pay a little more for good customer service. I worked for a company who didn't believe in project management, so they pretty much hired all developers. I was the program manager, and so you didn't pay as much because you didn't have one person that you got to talk to all the time who was handling your customer service and who was making sure that the developers were organized and doing everything quickly and efficiently. And sure, they could probably deliver something a little more quickly. There wasn't that quality layer in there. So sometimes you have to pay a little bit more for that. Meeting the team in person can be really great. We have worked with clients that we didn't meet in person, and we felt like we clicked with them, and then when we met them in person, it was sort of like, oh, this is a little bit awkward. Like it is a personality thing a little bit. It is a culture thing, I should say. It's the company personality, not a one-to-one, but company culture. If you don't fit with that culture, if they're really, really formal and you work in a more relaxed atmosphere or vice versa, it can be really awkward. Your processes don't match. Your people don't match. It's just never a comfortable working relationship. That can cause a ton of other problems. So it's not always possible, but meeting in person can be a really nice thing, or video chatting instead of just doing a couple phone calls. And just like in the dating world, if it seems too good to be true, it really might be. Ask deeper questions. I know a lot of times we're in a hurry, especially towards the end of the fiscal year. We just need someone on board, right? But try to ask deeper questions. What technologies are you comfortable with? When have you done something like this? Give me an example. Those kinds of things can really bring out some things that you wouldn't normally have thought of. So what can a perfect match look like? Don't have candlelight dinners with your vendor. I know, don't do it, but I liked the picture. Communication, transparency can be a really great thing, just like in a relationship. You want someone who's sort of a trusted partnership and equal in a lot of cases. Again, sometimes you just need some personnel augmentation, staff augmentation. I get that. That's sort of, a lot of this applies there too. Maybe in that case you just need to be able to give some directive and have them do it. But if you're really hiring a vendor, a strategic vendor for a partnership, being open and honest about who you are and what you need upfront can really make sure that you're all on the same page. It really can be a good thing. The company I work for now, I actually worked there about 12 years ago. I came back and we still have some of our relationships. 12 years later, things that had been in place when I was there the first time, that's a long relationship. We have clients that we've been in business with for 20 years. They can be beautiful. Sure, some don't last as long, some weren't the right fit, but there are ways to make them last long if you need them to. Again, this sort of mutually beneficial, not one-sided, dictation. Nobody really wants to be dictated to. Most companies want to help you and to give you strategic guidance and to give you ideas and suggestions. If you let them, you might get a little bit further. I mean, we all are good at what we do, but sometimes we could use an outside idea. Having everyone on the same page. Again, all of your requirements, from the hosting to the technical, the development team if they're involved, to the communications team, or whoever's involved, the business team, whatever groups are involved, getting them in up front can make sure that everyone's truly on the same page. And it really is like a dating relationship. Interview each other. It's not one-sided versus the other. Your vendor company is probably interviewing you a little bit too to make sure you're a good fit for them, because if you're not, it's going to be worse for them in the long run too. If the relationship doesn't work out and they can't deliver what you need, it's going to cost them more in arguing it later. And so this can help everybody on both sides. So just some thoughts, and I actually sort of blew through that, but do you guys have questions, thoughts, scenarios? Yeah.
Your point about intelligent questions coming out. I know that's a formal RFP process, and I'm on the vendor side of things. But one, as I was thinking about that, I think it's a really good point, and from whether it's a government or NGO or whatever, I think that will show you the vendors that are thinking about it strategically. One thing I'd like to just throw out there is typically we'll get an RFP that we care very much about. And they're typically fairly complex, which will parse out to several people in the organization right away for that quick read, look for red flags, go no-goes. And then you've got to develop your questions so they can be addressed at the bidders conference potentially or whatever. And it happens every time. And these RFPs are 120 pages long or whatever. It's like peeling layers back from an onion. And you keep peeling the layers back, and some of those more deeper questions will come out. I would just encourage folks that if it's possible to have an ongoing, this is all about human communication at the end of the day, having that work and connection and all, whether it's dating or
totally agree.
That it's possible to keep that line of communication. At some point, it's got to be in a formal government process stopped to meet procurement concerns and all that. It's so important, and given 7 days to review something, to submit questions by a certain date at 2:00, you might not get to them all, and you do care, and you are a strategic partner. Mm-hmm. So that would just be something I'd throw out, that keeping that communication going as much as you can in the formal nature it's got to be is helpful to everybody.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, you don't go on one date with someone and decide whether you're going to marry them for the rest of your, and be with them forever. So the more you can talk, the more you can get to know them, the better. And of course, like you said, there's parameters around it, especially in government, but where you can be flexible, where you can keep that open for longer, it's probably a good thing on both sides. Other thoughts or questions? This might be the fastest presentation in history then. All right. Oh, yeah.
If you're looking for a vendor and let's say you're really approaching it as I don't even know what I want on there. Mm-hmm. Say a past vendor, you're not satisfied with the product that you're getting, along those lines. How do you really start to examine even just the broader questions of, what type of user experience do you want? What type of integration do you want with other systems? How do you start to address that even from I did not have a work product that I was satisfied with. Yeah. I'm not sure that I can accurately describe what I want.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There's a couple ways, and it depends a little bit how formal.
Sorry, the mic.
That's okay. Can you hear me better?
I can hear you. I just want them recording.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. So I think there's a couple different ways depending on how formal or informal an environment you work in. If it's more informal, I would say, you know, you can call a couple vendors. Don't rely on just one is my best advice. Call a couple vendors, talk to them. A lot of showing them sort of the work product you had and pointing out where and what specifically it doesn't work for you is really helpful for a vendor. Actually, at the kickoff of almost every project our team does, we ask, even if it's just sort of a front-end website design, what websites do you hate? Tell us what you hate and why you hate it. That is super incredibly helpful, believe it or not. So even just starting there is a really good place to start. If you're in a more formal environment and you do have to write an RFP and there's more rules and all of that piece, you can start by doing market research. And so doing that market research, again, talking to a few vendors, understanding what they've built in the past, what they can do that's similar to what you're talking about. Asking for white papers ahead before you start writing this RFP. You know, there's nothing wrong with that. Asking for a white paper and looking at a couple white papers is very different than what I was talking about, letting a vendor lead your RFP writing. So you're still writing to what you want. You're just doing the research to understand what's out there, what's possible, that kind of thing ahead of time. So did that answer your question? There's a few different ways that I would say. Again, it's always best to communicate and talk. So if you have that ability, do it. If you don't, the white paper option can be a good one to fit into the more formal, restrictive environment. Actually, on one of our rescue missions, before we ever even got into the project, we asked to see their list of current bugs and notes on that, so that we could understand the scope of what we were bidding on and understand what really wasn't working for them. And we actually ended up not bidding on it and saying to them, you know what, all of these bugs and issues and everything with your budget, we think you're going to have some trouble. So we're willing to help with you rescope this if you're willing to, or talk about what the budget could be, but we don't think we can meet your needs for your budget either. You're going to be just as unhappy with us, and it's good. We don't want to do that. So, so that can be a really helpful thing as well. Anyone else have thoughts or questions? All right. Well, I guess go forth and date. Thanks, everybody.